Good morning. Welcome to another edition of the SiGMA podcast, where today our guest has a bit of a different background to what we're used to over here at the podcast. Today we have the Executive Secretary of the National Coordinating Committee in combating anti-money laundering and also terrorism financing. Pauline, thank you so much for accepting our invitation today. And I'd also like to thank the Ministry of Finance, the PermSec and the NCC itself for allowing us to have such an esteemed guest today on our podcast. Pauline, the NCC, exactly, what is it?
So first of all, thank you, Trevor, for inviting me to be here. It's a pleasure. The NCC, so as you said, I'm the Executive Secretary, and when we talk about the NCC, it's quite complex to explain, so basically I like to refer to a quote. Mm-hmm. So there's a quote by Ford, which I'm Henry Ford. He says that getting together is the beginning, working together is progress, actually staying together is success. So that's the NCC.
A bit like marriage.
It depends. I'm not the best one to speak about marriages, but
neither am I.
So when we talk about NCC, actually that is what we do. We bring together supervisory and law enforcement, and we make sure.
Time out. So you bring supervisory and law enforcement. Law enforcement would be the police, right?
Police and Office of the AG as well.
And Office of the AG.
Yes.
So you would bring law enforcement and prosecution.
Yes, as well.
Okay, and supervisory, what would that be?
Supervisory would have the Malta Financial Services Authority.
So the MGA.
MGA, Financial Intelligence Analysis Unit, Malta Business Registry. So we all work together.
So you bring them all together?
Yes.
Okay.
And
that must be a heavy forum to chair.
It depends. Once we start cooperating together, it's better than having one authority acting in silos. So that's the benefit of having such a coordinating committee.
How important is that you have all of them together and you share information?
I think it's extremely important. Why? Because basically even having them together is not enough. We create task forces, for example, subcommittees. So we dig deeper into the topics we want to address.
Okay.
And basically sometimes the supervisory authority has information that if there is this mechanism in place, there wouldn't be that sharing of information.
Okay.
So let me give you an example. So in the previous iteration of the NRA, it was 2018. In 2018, it was identified that this size, so Malta is so small, it was identified that there is a lack of cooperation between the authorities. And therefore, there was the need for the NCC. So we actually are there because of the recognition of
the finding. So the NCC is a recent creation?
Yes, we have been there since 2019. So it's not long time that it's been there.
Was this before or after grey listing?
It was before.
Before. So the NCC was not a response to grey listing?
Actually, so keep in mind, the process of the grey listing started as from 2018 because there was the on-site visit by Manival. There was the period of time for which Malta had to report. So NCC came in actually when it all almost started past the Manival on-site evaluation. So we were part and parcel of trying to submit all the feedback and then getting Malta out of the grey list with the cooperation of all the authorities. So not NCC per se.
Okay. But let's say when we got grey listed, was it the NCC? Because my limited knowledge here would seem to suggest, given that you have coordination in your name, you would coordinate the effort in order to get us off the grey list. Am I right or am I wrong in that respect?
You're right. You're very much right. So basically, the NCC would have.
So we need to thank you for getting us off the grey list then.
I always tend to emphasize it's a national effort.
Okay.
But basically the NCC, yes, would be responsible to follow the action plan by the Financial Action Task Force, make sure that we submit all the feedback. The NCC would be consolidating all the feedback, but the results, it would be the supervisor and the law enforcement that gives us the results.
Yes.
Who would give the direction, for example.
Okay. I don't want to get into supervisory and enforcement at this stage because enforcement is leading to a number of cases in court, and we've also had a bit of a discussion on this podcast.
Yes, I followed it with Philip.
But we will get back. We will get back to that. I already have a feeling that this is going to lead to another episode with you over here.
I thought he was going to say grey listing, and I'm adamant that no.
But out of curiosity, how did you get involved actually in the NCC?
My role was, I have a background in economics, so after 15 years career in the economic policy department, there was a job vacancy for the NCC, and I chose to change completely career. But I believe that having an economics background proved very helpful, because you have to measure with effectiveness, so statistics are needed. And so I found myself there. Okay. I was chief economics officer, and then I got the position of head of NCC as well.
And how do you feel about the subject of money laundering? Does it fascinate you? Doesn't it fascinate you?
I prefer anti-money laundering, but yes, it fascinates me a lot. Why? Basically, because also I've been following your podcast, and I think it's important, our remit, because it's based on a methodology. We follow the Financial Action Task Force methodology. Okay. And when you talk about Financial Action Task Force, you hear the word recommendations, which recommendations might be misleading.
Yes.
They actually have to be adhered to.
And that's lawyer speak.
Or English speaking.
Out of a job.
So basically, it's fascinating. Why? Because once you know the methodology, you actually learn and understand that these anti-money laundering mechanisms are important to have a risk-based approach. Okay. So it's important. Why? Even in economics, we started with the lecture on scarcity. So scarce resources, even the most rich person in the world has scarce resources. Why? Because he doesn't have unlimited time. So basically, having understood the methodology, you know that you need to adopt a risk-based approach and use the resources accordingly.
And have you, the historical elements of money laundering, have you ever jumped into them?
I'm laughing because recently I gave a lecture. And basically, before, way back, it wasn't follow the money. It was actually...
The follow the money actually was born, if you may permit me, because this is the part of money laundering which fascinates me, is when you go back in history, back in the 80s, when the mayor of New York, when the attorney general of New York was a certain Rudy Giuliani, and the head of the anti-mafia unit in Sicily was Giovanni Falcone, they actually came together to work on, at the time, was the RICO legislation in the States, which then led to money laundering. But the phrase "follow the money" was coined by those two in New York. If you read the biography of both of them, at least on this they both seem to agree. They both say we worked on it together. It was always follow the money, and that is how then...
I'm talking before the follow the money.
No, I'm talking... that's where my interest was piqued by follow the money. When I was at uni, first year, we had a subject, philosophy of law, which was taught to us by Professor Mr. Bonici. And one of the chapters we had in the book was the common good. And to illustrate to us the common good, he used the Sicilian judges. So that's where I started following the lives of Falcone and Borsellino. And once you start reading the books and you find comparisons, then you say,
that's more interesting.
That is, Giuliani has a brilliant book, and any aspiring politician out there, I really recommend it. It's called Leadership, especially the chapter Funerals Mandatory, Weddings Discretionary. It's an instruction manual for who wants to get into politics.
Interesting.
But getting back to AML, so you got involved from economic policy, you moved to AML.
I'm taking note of the book.
If I may ask, what does the job entail, apart from coordinating and bringing people together? But then, the end product of what you do, what would that be?
I would say rather than an end, it's a means to an end. The National Risk Assessment is the main role that we have. In fact, it's even in the law that as NCC we need to always update risk assessments and after have a national strategy in place.
So it's twofold.
Yes.
You drafted the NRA in consultation with
all the authorities and even private sector representatives.
Mela. So it's NRA, And strategy.
Yes.
Let's go into NRA for now. So you said you bring I understood the part of bringing all the authorities together, which must not be easy. I would presume some authorities might have differing interests, or not?
No, not necessarily. Once they get the concept that we need to measure effectiveness, we need results, we need a good risk understanding, you need this product to prioritize your actions, I think everyone is on board now.
Do you think that grey listing has actually helped for us to cooperate better together?
I think yes. I think it was a lesson to be learned because everyone understood.
But have we learned our lesson?
I hope yes, and I'm the one that always believes. So I'm the one that always sees the glass half empty. I think that there is much more to do, but I think that we have done a lot, and
so we're on the right direction. We are in the right direction.
I would say I hope so, but I think so, and even from the results of the NRA, because we've seen a lowering in the money laundering risk.
Okay, so NRA. Before we get so what is an NRA?
So basically, and I would have to explain some terms, when we talk about national risk assessment, we're focusing on money laundering, terrorism financing, and proliferation financing targeted financial sanction risks. Now, money laundering, there was a full session with Philip, which I followed. It was very good. When we talk about TFPF, even from the...
What is that?
So terrorism financing, what we did was...
But is terrorism financing a risk over here? Because I don't really see it.
You don't see it, but basically what we saw, first of all, there was a lowering in the risk.
Okay. In terrorism financing.
In terrorism financing, because if I may, it's one of my favorite areas. Why? Because in 2018 we said that basically the risk should be medium, the residual risk. However, because of our location, we're seeing it as, we prefer saying medium high to be cautious. This time round we didn't say so. And
our location, because we're in the middle of the Mediterranean, so close to North Africa.
Yes, but you said how it happens. So what we did was you can have raising of funds in Malta for terrorism. You can have movement of funds.
Okay, raising
and
I find
you
is
could
hard.
have
Movement
using.
maybe.
Movement may be a lot.
Maybe
even
a
raising,
lot.
Yes, but we got an overall residual risk of medium.
Raising.
Why do you say?
How do you raise funds?
So
for
let me give you an
terrorism in
example.
Malta?
Let me give you a good example. So we have.
And excuse me, yes, viewers, we're a bit off the topic of gaming right now, but
Yes,
for
it's
our
true.
general knowledge, I find this quite interesting.
Although true and not, because in terrorism financing we assessed also gaming. But the
You're going
movement,
to tell me you're using slots to find...
but you still have to assess it, although it will
If anything, what I read is how the North Koreans use online gaming, but they operate it from within their own confines. They don't operate it from other jurisdictions. At least that's what I read. So
and it's correct.
it's okay.
But you still have to assess it, so
Okay.
even if it is a lower risk. But basically, when we see by movement, a typical one, it can be through voluntary organizations.
NGOs.
Yes, it can be as why? Because the FATF, I told you the methodology, has a specific definition that those VOs that primarily raise, disperse funds for to high-risk jurisdictions. So there you have to monitor. In Malta, we have a small share. We have only 55, if I recall correctly. It's publicly available, so I'm saying nothing
55
secret.
what?
So 55 VOs that their activity is primarily dispersing or raising funds for charitable activities to high-risk
Abroad?
jurisdictions linked to TF. So 55 out of 1,700.
Jesus, we have
So-
55 of
But that's a
those.
small amount compared to 1,700. And what do we do
I
next?
might have to ask just Saliba eventually on
He
the
will,
podcast.
he will be very willing to participate because we work very closely as well. He's part and parcel as well of the NCC. And for example, then what do we see? We don't just quote this figure. So these disbursements are being done through what? If it's through banks, so basically there's a mitigating measure in place.
But what about, what's that?
And there's the element of companies as well.
There is the Arabic Muslim system, Hawal.
The Hawala, yes, as well.
Does that come into play in
That
any
comes
way?
into play into raising the
raising.
funds from Malta. So that was assessed as well, even in terms of radicalization, which as I said, we see more the threat being happening through movement.
Okay. So that's for terrorism financing.
Yes.
Gaming, but is not involved, right? You
No,
concluded that gaming.
We see, for example, legal persons, companies. We have a number of companies that their BO resides or national in TF, in high-risk jurisdictions
Their
linked to
UBO.
TF. Their UBO. So we have to pay attention there as well.
When you say high-risk jurisdictions, would it mean those which are grey-listed and blacklisted on the FATF guidelines?
We have a list specific for internal purposes, so here I will not dig deeper.
So you have a different list to us.
More extended. But if you read the NRA, there is specifically the sources, so what we refer to. So basically you can arrive to it. But there is a mechanism in place through the PPPs, the private-public partnerships, whereby such information can be shared, but we couldn't make this public because otherwise it would cause diplomatic issues as well.
So, we actually have 5 minutes left. And
I
we
could
have
talk for
just
hours.
scratched the surface.
We haven't defined proliferation financing
and
as
we
well.
have quite a few questions left.
Okay, so
strategy. The NCC is also involved in strategy.
yes.
So, right now, strategy, mission statement, I think would be one, I'm trying to guess here, keep Malta off the grey list. 2, how do we improve, fine-tune our services, our work?
I would say rather differently. So it all maps the findings of the National Risk Assessment. For example, derisking. That should be a major issue.
What is derisking?
Derisking is when you don't apply the risk-based approach appropriately. So we hear there are figures as well, publicly quoted, and it's in the NRA. We see that from the legal persons, the companies in Malta, only 42% have an IBAN in Malta. So that is a very small amount.
Wait a second, not to be...
You discussed this with Philip as well, because I was...
IBAN. I mean, I understand. But if you have Maltese banks who, after grey listing, it's become almost impossible for companies based here to get gaming.
That's why we need to address it.
So you're complaining that Maltese companies don't have Maltese IBANs.
But that's when you do not apply the risk-based approach appropriately.
No, I think it's the banks being a bit more difficult than they actually should be.
Not necessarily. If your risk appetite is low, you just decide to not mitigate but not accept the client.
Go and look in Gibraltar. And this is why I'm going to argue on this point.
Gibraltar is still in the EU high list of countries.
No, it's not, but it's removed
in
from
the EU.
It's no longer a grey list. Yes, but the EU now it's a different reality. Okay. Yeah. Gibraltar. I say this because number one, I lived in Gib for a period of time. I happen to know the former minister, Albert Isolas, who actually took this very seriously. I know the regulator over there, and he's a good friend, and I have many friends in Gibraltar. So Gibraltar, to me, is a home as well. And I feel that over there on the banking front, you did not see the same knee-jerk reaction that we saw in Malta. This is what I asked some of my friends. So why in Malta, we went from, in Maltese, we have an expression which is beautiful. Yo neja, yo misjura. So it's either raw or overcooked.
Because in my opinion, it was a tick-in-the-box exercise as well. So rather, first of all, you're not applying the risk-based approach. You're just derisking.
Who is not applying the risk?
The subject person. So the subject person.
Are not applying this.
So rather than actually
so the easiest decision for them was just don't accept the business.
Just don't onboard.
But then look at what's going on. Now, the NCC is sort of complaining because we only have 42%.
So we're not complaining. We're saying we need to address this. Okay. So complaining is useless. We need to address this. What's happening is PPPs are one solution.
PPPs,
public-private partnerships.
Okay.
Why? Because even FIU have also the AMLCFT clinics, which also try to enhance the risk understanding, what can be done, because it's useless not onboarding. I mean, it's better mitigating than not addressing the problem. So yes, it is a problem that we need to address. And there is also the MFSAC strategy, which also tries to address this option as well, this problem.
Okay.
It has been one of the findings that we need to address. And also abuse of legal persons. We need to, which is linked to the fact that you have 42% of the companies not having an IBAN in Malta.
Okay.
Tax advisor. So I can continue forever.
We've overrun. We have overrun, right?
And we didn't touch gaming.
We haven't touched, so we're going to have a part 2. We'll try and sort that out. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank
I
you.
hope that the viewers also enjoy this podcast. It's a bit different, but also we are going to be trying our utmost, not just to get people from the gaming sector per se, but also people from the institutions which, one way or another, affect the gaming sector. So we'll also be calling this a form of evolution of our podcast in order to always make it more interesting for you, the viewers, and also for our guests.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I urge you to go onto our YouTube page, sigma.world, and over there click the subscribe button in order to be kept up to date with our content. Thank you so much.